The film begins at a university where there is a research team consisting of 5 people: Zoe, Frank, Clay, Nico, and Ava, the videographer. We see Eva recording Frank and Zoe explaining the purpose of their research. Frank explains that they are conducting the Lazarus Project, which started from Zoe's breakthrough. He also explains how to activate the Lazarus serum using a cardiac defibrillator with an electrical charge. At the end of the recording, Frank mentions that their goal in developing the serum is to provide professional health services so that someone you care about can continue to live without cognitive loss and long-term side effects. The next day, they gather in the laboratory to discuss the previous failed serum trial. While they are struggling to address the failure, Clay casually continues to vape. Zoe, who dislikes Clay's behavior, scolds him to stop vaping and calls him a jerk. Frank, seeing them argue, immediately scolds Zoe and Clay to stop acting like children. Clay, who had been silent, finally speaks up and suggests they try adding selected potassium to the serum and limit the cardiac defibrillation to 30 milliseconds, then add pH and oxygen to induce a reaction. Without further ado, they head to the test room to try Clay's suggestion. In the first trial, they fail, but Frank doesn't give up and instructs them to repeat the experiment. However, in the second trial, the dead dog they are testing still shows no signs of life. Ava, the videographer who is focused on recording the dog, sees the dog's ears twitch and immediately reports it to them. However, they do not believe it, and Zoe says it might just be a muscle reflex. Suddenly, the dog wakes up and barks. They, seeing the dog alive, immediately take it for a checkup. After examining the dog, Frank tells them to keep the incident a secret. He names the dog Rocky. They then have a small party to celebrate their success. The next day, they gather again in the laboratory to check Rocky's condition. When Rocky is put through a CT scan, it turns out that the Lazarus serum is still present in its bloodstream. Frank says the serum should have disappeared within a few hours. Clay also notes abnormalities in Rocky's brainstem, indicating symptoms of hypothyroidism that could make the dog extremely aggressive. It turns out their secret research had reached the university's ears, and as a result, their research was going to be halted. The dean also informed Frank that a company would take over their research and seize everything related to the Lazarus Project. But Frank and his team didn't give up easily. They planned to duplicate the serum and prove that it works. Night fell, and since only Eva's keycard wasn't taken by the university, Eva was tasked with entering the university and unlocking the back door for them. Long story short, Eva successfully opened the back door. Before the door was closed again, Frank told Eva to leave because she could get caught and imprisoned if they were discovered. However, Eva stayed silent and immediately closed the door. She then joined the others in the laboratory. Once in the laboratory, Nico was immediately tasked with monitoring the university's CCTV to track the security movements. The preparations were complete, and Frank instructed Zoe to pull the electric switch to activate the Lazarus serum. When Zoe pulled the switch, she was shocked by the device because she forgot to remove her ring. Frank, seeing Zoe lying down, checked her and found that Zoe was dead. Undeterred, Frank tried to administer an adrenaline shot, but it didn't work. Then Frank tried again with a defibrillator, but it still failed. Unable to bear the grief of losing Zoe, Frank decided to use the Lazarus serum to revive Zoe. Frank was confident it would work because they had previously revived a dog named Rocky. However, Clay, Nico, and Eva opposed him because the serum had never been tested on humans before. Frank insisted on using the serum and said, "You guys go, and let me do it alone because I don't want to lose her." Seeing Frank's fear and sadness, they eventually agreed to help Frank administer the serum to Zoe's body. Zoe was then injected with the Lazarus serum by Frank, assisted by Nico, Clay, and Eva. As Frank was injecting the Lazarus serum into Zoe, the sound of security footsteps was heard. Nico, Clay, and Eva quickly told Frank to hide until the campus security left. Shortly after, the security left because the area remained secure. To ensure the security had gone, Frank exited the room and checked. Then Frank turned back and entered the room, and was shocked to see Zoe sitting with her face covered by a white cloth. Frank approached Zoe slowly and found that Zoe had been revived by the Lazarus serum. The team then began to examine Zoe, and Zoe was put through a CT scan. Clay reviewed the results and told Frank that something was wrong with Zoe. However, Frank dismissed Clay's opinion and said he would remove the Lazarus serum still in Zoe's blood. Nico and Eva also watched Zoe's scan results on the monitor. Nico told Eva that humans only use 10% of their brain capacity at any given time, but on the monitor, Zoe's brain was glowing everywhere. After the examination, Frank moved Zoe to a sofa. Zoe asked Frank if they shouldn't go to the hospital, but Frank replied that the lab equipment was more advanced, and besides, no one could take better care of Zoe than Frank. Frank continued to reassure Zoe that she would be fine. Frank then left Zoe and walked over to his team. Left alone, Zoe began to experience odd sensations. Zoe could hear her friend's thoughts, including Frank's. She could even move a pen without touching it. Then Zoe went to the bathroom. In the bathroom, Zoe saw in the mirror that she had two faces. One face was smiling, while the other looked confused. Soon after, Rocky the dog came in. Rocky growled at Zoe, and immediately Zoe's aggression emerged, leading her to kill Rocky. After that, Zoe went to Frank's workspace. Zoe approached Frank and said that something was wrong. Zoe claimed that she was changing, but Frank wouldn't listen and said that Zoe was fine. Frank then injected Zoe, saying she just needed to sleep for a while. Zoe fell asleep. Eva then came in to cover her, and somehow, Eva was drawn into Zoe's dream. In Zoe's dream, Eva was in a burning apartment hallway. There, Eva also saw a child. Suddenly, Eva's hand was grabbed by someone with burned hands, and Eva woke up from her dream. Frank, Nico, and Clay were puzzled by Eva's fear and asked what had happened. Eva then recounted her recent experience. However, Frank did not believe her and said it was impossible. Frank said that it must have been Zoe who told Eva, but strangely, Eva's arm was injured as if it had been exposed to something hot, similar to her dream. Moved to Nico, who is very skilled with computers. Nico said someone had been watching them and observing everything they had been doing. Instantly, Frank told them to pack up because they needed to leave the place. Meanwhile, Frank went to pack up other items in the adjacent room. Next, Zoe continued to have the same dream, the burning apartment hallway. And in reality, Zoe started to levitate from her bed. While levitating, her eyes opened, and her irises had turned black. Zoe screamed. Her scream was heard by Nico. Nico went to check on Zoe but found she was no longer in bed. Nico searched for Zoe in other rooms. Suddenly, Zoe appeared and startled Nico. Zoe asked Nico to help her feel normal again, but Nico refused, saying they were still trying to understand Zoe's condition. Zoe didn't take kindly to Nico's refusal, and Nico was gruesomely killed. He was trapped inside a cabinet until his blood flowed out. After killing Nico, Zoe returned to her original spot. When Frank, Clay, and Eva arrived, Zoe pretended to have just woken up. Frank asked where Nico was, and Zoe said he might have gone to the bathroom, but Clay immediately replied that he had just come from the bathroom and Nico wasn't there. Zoe calmly said that was what Nico had said. Clay, frustrated by Zoe's response, wanted to call the police, but Frank stopped him, and they argued. When Clay tried to call again, the lights suddenly went out, and the phone died. Frank and Clay left the room to try to find a way out, but they had no success. They couldn't open the door. The scene shifts to Eva and Zoe, who are sitting face to face. When Eva tries to leave, Zoe tells her that Eva doesn't belong there and will never be part of their team. Then Clay and Frank enter, saying the door has automatically locked and cannot be opened. Eva, not caring about Frank and Clay's arrival, immediately asks Zoe where Nico is, as Zoe was the last person with Nico. Clay also asks Zoe where Nico is, pointing at Zoe with his e-cigarette. While yelling at Zoe, the e-cigarette suddenly goes down his throat and causes Clay to choke. Eva and Frank, shocked by what happened, quickly get tongs and a flashlight. They manage to remove the e-cigarette from Clay's throat, but Clay is already dead. Frank and Eva, still shocked, look at Zoe, who is sitting and slightly smiling. Then all the lights in the room suddenly go out. Frank and Eva panic as Zoe disappears from her seat. While panicking and searching for Zoe, all the lab equipment and supplies float in the air, and Zoe is responsible for all this. The equipment then crashes down, hitting Frank and Eva. Soon after, Frank and Eva wake up. They search for a weapon to use against Zoe and find a sedative. Frank plans to inject it into Zoe. Before leaving, Frank asks Eva to promise that she will not let Zoe leave the lab alive and harm others. Frank then goes to find Zoe. He finds Zoe in the lab hallway and approaches her, trying to persuade Zoe. Frank says he will fix things and help Zoe. Zoe, not immediately trusting him, holds Frank's head and hears Frank's thoughts. And it turns out, Frank was caught trying to kill Zoe and stopped. Zoe got angry and pressed Frank's head until blood came out of his nose, and Frank died. Zoe then moved to the lab and injected all the Lazarus serum into her body. Then she looked for Eva. Eva, panicking, prepared an injection for Zoe. In the darkness, a frightened Eva searched for Zoe. Eva looked for Zoe in every room until finally Zoe appeared upside down, right in front of Eva. Then Zoe pushed Eva, and Eva immediately entered Zoe's dream. Eva is now in the corridor of a burning apartment with a little girl who turns out to be Zoe, holding matches in her hand. Eva asks if Zoe started the fire, and little Zoe admitted it. Soon after, adult Zoe appeared in the dream. The blazing and terrifying Zoe approached Eva and little Zoe. Eva then asked little Zoe to open the door to a room where people were calling for help. When little Zoe managed to open the door, Eva succeeded in giving Zoe the injection, and Zoe collapsed. Meanwhile, a rescue team entered the room. One of them approached Eva, asked if she was okay, and then hugged her. When Eva turned towards where Zoe was placed, Zoe was gone, and it turned out it was Zoe who was hugging Eva, and Eva was killed by Zoe. Zoe then took Eva and the others to be revived using the Lazarus serum in Zoe's blood. First, Zoe injected the Lazarus serum into Frank, until Frank woke up from his death with eyes wide open and mouth agape, and the film ends. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe, because by subscribing you have supported me to make better videos. See you in the next video.